Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ali Aslan, a Washington correspondent and columnist for Turkish and rising political influence as a major civil society group. They have attracted increasing attention, at times marred with negative biases. Dr. Yavuz's work gives us an objective analysis of Gulen and the movement with special insights on possible implications for the future of Muslim and Turkish engagement in contemporary world. So before further ado, let's listen to Hakan Yavuz. He's going to make a presentation for about like 15 minutes for us, and then we're going to go ahead with question and answers.
Well, thank you, Ali. Thanks for coming. There are three issues I want to deal with. One, why did I write this book? Second, what is the message of this book? Third, what is left out, or what are the issues I think needs to be explored, or the critical aspect of the movement as well. I wrote this book because my original dissertation very much covered Islamic movements in Turkey, even though I did my field work in the Fergana Valley and Turkey, but I left the Fergana Valley aside and very much focused on Turkey. The Gulen movement was one of my case studies in mid-1990s, and I try to examine and follow the evolution of the movement. And I'm not a member of the movement. I want to mention that as well. I approached this issue totally from a scholarly perspective. And I did a number of field works in the Balkans, Central Asia, and Europe on the movement. What made me to write this book, one, this misunderstanding of the movement, both in Turkey and outside. Second, somewhat inability of the members of the movement to explain what they are doing, because the movement is very much action-oriented movement, and there are, I would say, just recently there are some institutes to conceptualize what movement is trying to do. So there are a number of conferences the movement put together, some scholars, some members of the movement, but I was not satisfied with those work as well. And I decided to write the movement, one, to examine impact of neoliberal economic policies unleashed by Özal, and then also deepening of Turkish democracy, how democracy and market economy shapes Islamic movement, religion in general, Islam in particular. In other words, what we have in Turkey, that in Europe usually Protestant Reformation played an important role in the evolution of capitalism, whereas in Turkey the capitalism and democracy helped to create a more or less Calvinist Protestant Islam. I think the Gulen movement is one of those interpretation of Islam, I would say the most powerful one and most successful one, tries to reconcile with democracy, modernity in general, democracy, human rights, and market economy. So what we have here, a new Islam. And I define this new Islam, I think there are four major characteristics of this new, imagined, constructed, or new understanding of Islam, or we can call it a new Islam. One of the defining characteristics of this new Islam is that religion, it is a type of religiosity more or less rooted in inner self, the soul, the inner self, that believing is important as long as you behave. There is this connection between believing and behaving, that the religion should motivate you to do something So the religion, the piety is not for the sake of piety, but the piety for the sake of improving social, political, and economic condition of your own society. So here the piety becomes a motivating force, not only fulfilling your religious duties, but rather religion is an instrument in a way to improve your social conditions. The second, by New Islam, religion, especially Islam, in the conceptual map of Gulen is a civil philosophy. This is something very important. By civil philosophy, I mean Gulen wants to integrate Muslims into public debate and discussion, including interpretation of Quran. And so the understanding of Quran, or making some decision, in other words, for Gulen to build the consensus is something very important, the consensus building. That consensus building should not be left to one or two religious scholars. People should participate, what the verse means, what we need to do. And this Islam provides that shared code of language, how to debate, how to discuss, and it offers a general sense of good life for this building a consensus. So again, building consensus through shared language of Islam. I think this is something very important. So it is not the process in terms of building the consensus, but that what you share, this definition of good life, is something very important for the new understanding of Gulen. Again, this is not an Islam of Sharia. This is an ethical Islam. Overall, in the Turkish case, if you look at the religious movements in Turkey, no one wants Sharia, because also the Sharia has a very negative meaning because of a number of historical and political events in the country. But this is a Islam, ethical Islam, a type of Islam you build a basis to create a consensus. Finally, I would say the third major characteristics of this new Islam is being this voluntary, that it is very similar to Abdullah al-Naim, a professor at Emory University, and this voluntary that you should make your own decision to be Muslim or not to be Muslim. It is your right to follow or not to follow. In other words, that the voluntary activity, that the piety itself is also becomes voluntary. It should not be forced, neither by community or by the state. This voluntary aspect is something very important. This is why we don't know the membership of the movement. Who's in and who's out is not clear. People come and people leave. And sometimes people come together for certain activity. When that activity is finished, people go home. Because it is very much this voluntary aspect is something very important. And this voluntary aspect also, that the religion or piety should be voluntary, it has social implications, some spillover positive effect on the society. Finally, this new Islam, according to my own understanding, it is an attempt to create enlightenment, or there is a conscious effort to bring or filter revelation through reason. Reason plays an important role in terms of the critical thinking, in terms of what is right and what is wrong, to determine it through consensus building. I think that is something also very important, this the critical thinking, and also this emphasis on open society. But you have to imagine and think the Gulen movement within larger conservative Turkish society, and where movement was and where it is today, an incredible change and transformation. Now, I would argue that these are the four major defining characteristics of this new Islam that the Gulen tries to articulate. In my book, I try to separate the Gulen movement and meaning. The book consists of three parts, because what Gulen thinks and what Gulen is trying to do is not necessarily manifested in the movement, because the movement activities are rooted and located in different countries, and the social and political conditions of each country very much shapes the meaning. The meaning is the outcome. So there is this tension between the ideas of Gulen and the actions and activities of the movement. They are not always the same. I am not saying they are contradictory, but the conditions, let's say in Kyrgyzstan or in Uzbekistan or in United States, are not the same. So the activities of the movement, it also varies. There is this variation. Now, when you look at the totality of Gulen's cognitive map or his philosophy, I would say also how this cognitive map of Gulen is carried out by the movement. There are 7 major centers of, I would say, concept and activity, the practices based on some concept. One, as I said, this Islam as a civil philosophy is something very important for Gulen. Second, the movement and Gulen very much they stress bridging more than bonding, bridging with different cultures and different societies. Here, something quite interesting. It links to this consensus building. Also, how do you transform yourself? You transform yourself through acting with the other. There is this dialectic between self and other in terms of bridging with different cultures and different societies. This is, I think, something very important, and it also explains, helps us to understand interfaith dialogue of the movement. But the gist, people say, what is the purpose of this movement? My own work, and on the basis of my own study, I would say the key purpose of the movement is character formation. This is one of the, it is more, the purpose is not religious, I would say. Purpose is very much secular. It is a character formation. This is one of the reasons why education is something very important for the movement. Another aspect is the practice of the movement, which links to terminology or the concept of Gulen, how to teach Islam. This tension between temsil versus tabligh. Rather than preaching, you need to teach Islam through good examples. So the action, activity, practice, building institutions become much more important than going and preaching religion. Another aspect of the Islam of Gulen, I see the understanding of Islam by Gulen is, I call it a feminized Islam. I didn't deal this issue in the book, but I consider it as a feminized Islam. By feminized Islam, I mean the following, that when you read the memoirs of the Gulen, he argues that his grandmother and mother shaped his understanding of Islam more than his grandfather and father. His father and his father, they played an important role in terms of disciplining the body. But he argues that it is his grandmother and mother shaped his mind. And for Gulen, Islam is a felt emotion, that there is an inner dimension of Islam, and he believes that the sentimental, emotional aspect of Islam is essential in terms of action and activity. So there is this feminized aspect of of Islam, that it is a felt emotion. Then finally, another issue which is not part of the book, and it is a project of another book, that is for Gulen, this character formation is very important, but this character, one of the defining aspects of the character Gulen wants to shape should be someone who concerns the world, who cares others. There is this ethic of caring, ethical discourse to care the world because of that the world and humanity very much created by God. There is the sense that you care, and you should care if you are a Muslim, what is happening, your environment, the world and humanity, because of your love for God. So these are the, I would say, key issues of the book. What are the, I also criticize the book, in my book, the movement as well. I have 4 major areas that I think movement needs to focus on. One is the gender issue. I try to argue that movement is not where it's supposed to be. Recruitment of women and the gender is one of the issues. Certainly the Turkish culture, certainly how Islam is understood in Turkey plays an important role. There are some changes in terms of the movement emphasizes women's education more than other groups, but still it is one of the areas. The gender is a key issue. The second I see a problem area is transparency, and I try to bring this transparency, but again there is a legacy why movement is viewed as secretive because of the legal political situation in Turkey, a number of military coups. So most of the groups, they try to not to be open to carry out their activities in the public. But still, I think there is an issue of transparency. Certainly, if you look at the past of the movement, where it is today, there is an incredible improvement, but still, it is an issue area. The third issue area, I see the politicization of the movement, especially since 2007, because of attempt of the military coup in the country, or the Ergenekon, what is called today, that that the movement some way identified its future too closely with Justice and Development Party. Certainly in recent months there are areas what we see that there is a new emerging critical distance between movement and the Justice and Development Party, but the movement is viewed too political in recent years. Finally, the fourth area I see an issue area, this lack of critical thinking. In other words, movement is so much focused on action and activity and practice, and there is less time, or that those who are close followers of the movement, they spend less time, I would say, reading and debating, but more time doing something, achieving some goals. So these are the 4 areas I also bring in the book that are there. But again, if you look at the larger Muslim world, I would say this is the most progressive, most modern, in terms of most engaging movement in the larger Muslim world. That in terms of the education, what they have done in Turkey, in Central Asia, in some African countries, something incredible. And it really helped many people in Europe, in the Balkans, in Turkey, to love Islam more, to see an alternative vision, alternative version of Islam. But again, some of the issues and problems of Turkey you also could easily find in the movement as well. And I will end here.
Thank you. If I may, if you allow me, I'll ask the first few questions and then we're going to go back to the audience. Yeah. You introduced Hizmet movement as a promising model of engagement and interaction between Muslim religiosity and modernity. To what extent do you think Hizmet could inspire other faith-inspired, faith-based social movements in adapting to the new age? I mean the Muslim, other Muslim Islamic groups.
Well, I don't think the movement will not travel to every Muslim country. There are limits. I cannot imagine a movement becoming a model in some, let's say in Iran or in Saudi Arabia or some other countries. In other words, to understand the Gulen movement, the background is something very important. You have the Ottoman legacy, you have the Kemalist modernization reforms. I think movement is the outcome of the Kemalist project, the success of the Kemalist project in terms of education, in terms of transportation. And I don't see also the movement as anti-Kemalist in terms of Mustafa Kemal's philosophy of creating a republic, a modern, powerful republic. I think given the social and political background of Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, that Turkey never was colonized. There is no defeated mentality in Turkey. The Turks, they don't feel under siege. Gulen movement wants to join the European Union. They are the most aggressive. This is one of the area of tension with the Justice and Development Party, because Gulen movement wants to join the European Union, whereas the party is not reluctant. Other Islamic groups, because of the colonial legacy in the Arab world, in Egypt or other parts, they are very anti-European. But in Turkey, since we don't have this colonial legacy, since Turkey was not defeated the way the Arabs were defeated in 1967, that is in a way the collapse of time or the trauma. The last war Turkey had was in 1974 over Cyprus, and Turkey won. So all these factors are important. And also another factor, Turkey has an economy, tax-based economy. This is not an rentier economy. That the economic activity is something, the taxation is something very important, and neoliberal policies of Turgut Özal also help to create a market. In a way, I would say, given the historical legacy of Turkey, given contemporary the legacy of the Mustafa Kemal and legacy of Turgut Özal, I think Gulen movement is likely to provide example, but not a model. It will provide an example, but at the same time, on the basis of my fieldwork in Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, those are the two countries I saw indigenous Hizmet movement, not led by the people from Turkey, but led and shaped and financed by the Kyrgyz or the Kazakh. The third country is the Bosnia-Herzegovina. You also have in Bosnia some Bosniaks. They are the member of, but these are again ethnicity, Ottoman legacy. I yet to see a major debate in the Arab world or including in Iran about the movement. There are some schools very effective, I hear, in Malaysia and Indonesia, especially in Indonesia and some in Malaysia, certainly in the Balkan countries and Central Asia. But I don't think movement, given that the understanding of Islam is not Sharia Islam, but ethical Islam, I want where you have democratic institutions are more powerful, rule of law is more visible, is lax and comfortable with middle and upper middle class. I mean, a model for some other Muslim countries.
Thank you. Depending on the conditions, the Hizmet movement operates differently in different countries. In less democratic countries, for example, they usually try to keep a lower profile. In more free countries, they make sure they fully exercise democratic rights and opportunities there. Professionals and volunteers operating in different countries are having different experiences. So given the mobility and dynamism of the movement, what are the opportunities and challenges of having a base with so diverse and sometimes conflicting experiences?
Yes, I think this is, I'm coming from Salt Lake City. In Salt Lake is the holiest place in the United States, as you know. We believe, the people in Salt Lake, we believe that the Christ is coming to Salt Lake before it goes to Jerusalem. So if you look at the Mormon experience in different parts of the world, it is very similar, I would say, to the experience of the Hizmet. That the Mormons also, they are active in different political settings. And what we see, the movement, even in Turkey, it is now very difficult to talk about a single unified homogeneous movement. That because again there is no membership requirement, you don't know who's in and who's out, people come together because of certain purpose and goal to achieve. And this is not hierarchically organized movement, it is very much network type of movements. The network in here becomes very important. Gulen movement, if you look at their experience in Central Asia, or in Turkey, or in the United States, there are certainly similarities and differences. There are certain core you find wherever you go, how they dress, that they always have tie. They are, they don't have, most of them don't have any, you know, the mustache. And their conduct, they are very gentle. When you, you know, in a gathering, you can tell who is a part of the movement on the basis of the code of conduct. I think this is something very important. So there is a shared character here, that a certain form of the character, I think that is shared. The second, the movement very much focuses on the human being and community, less on the state. So this is, when you look at the movement in Kyrgyzstan or in Germany or in Turkey, you know, because their concern is character formation, their main concern is the empowerment of the community. So you see the similarities, but the strategies change. The goal is the same, but the tactics and strategies would vary from state to state on the basis of the legal, social, and political context of that country. So this is one of the, even in Turkey, the different regions of the country. So I try to make sure in my book that we should not make too many generalizations about the strategies of the movement, but there is certainly a shared core, what movement wants to do.
Since I cover foreign policy and international relations, let me kindly ask you to touch on a little bit on the foreign policy, international relations outlook of the movement. For example, has Hizmet movement been an important factor in recent Turkish outreach in the world? And how does having such a transnational, homegrown civic movement affect Turkish foreign policy in terms of means and outlook? And what do you think are the general principles of the movement when it comes to international relations? Say, for example, would you say the movement is confrontational or non-confrontational, pragmatic, realist? How would you comment on that?
Well, I think the movement is one of the there is a debate about the role of movement in Turkey, especially the state bureaucracy is not very comfortable with the movement because they don't want civil society participation. So the movement participates or tries to get engaged on a number of issues. And there is also this engagement not only inside the country but in foreign policy as well. That the movement very much focuses on civil diplomacy, that not the states, this is not a state-centric movement. Here, the concern is the human being and community. So the movement's foreign policy principles, I will say, they're very much the human right, especially the religious freedoms are something very important for the movement. And the human right discourse is important for the movement. But there is a debate whether movement is also supporting the human rights of those who do not share the vision of the movement. This is a debate in Turkey, as you know. But overall, when you look at outside, the human rights discourse, the individual rights, the community, the civil society, these are very important for the movement. In other words, if you look at Turkey's presence in many countries, regions in the world, outside the Turkish embassy, maybe in the United States you see Turkish Coalition of America, a little bit, but, or maybe only in Washington. But if you go outside the Washington, wherever you go, you have the centers of the movement. Or if you go to Europe, in the European cities, the same thing. In Central Asia, the same. I went to Tokyo, Japan, you have the Turkish embassy, and you have the Tatar mosque in Tokyo and some Muslim, small Muslim communities, and then the movement, nothing else. So what you have here, that the movement is quite active in terms of building societal ties, that society to society rather than state to state, because this is one of the main focus of the movement as well, the individual and community. And its foreign policy principles of the movement is, I would say, not confrontational, very much engagement. Movement tries to solve the problems through peaceful means. This is one of the reasons why Gulen was openly critical of the Israeli-Turkish tension over trying to break the siege of Gaza, because he believes that there should be a compromise, the diplomacy and negotiation, something very important for the movement. But to understand, again, the foreign policy principles of the movement, I think the core of the movement is very much, this is the human is something very important for the movement. So the foreign policy or other policies are very much the extension of this understanding. What is the purpose of the movement? To improve the social and economic conditions of the society.
Thank you.
But again, one more last thing, the movement is the most pro-European in the country. This is one of the area of tension between AK Party, because they used to be very pro-EU, but not anymore. And whereas the movement wants to see Turkey to be part of Europe rather than part of larger Middle East. This is something, so the movement sees the future of Turkey in Europe, not outside Europe. And it is also against the special membership status as well. So this is one of the area, especially on the foreign policy area. Also, the movement is not very comfortable with Turkish government's aggressive attitude towards Syria. The movement doesn't want Turkey to get involved or dictate what they would like to see less intervention in the affairs of the Arab countries. That doesn't mean less engagement. Turkey should engage, but Turkey should not see itself as an arrogant country to go and tell other Arab countries what is right and what is wrong. I think so, and relation with on Iran, there is also some differences of opinion.
They seem to be more critical on Iran.
They are more critical about Iranian government because of, again, they try to raise it in terms of the human rights issue in Iran and religious freedoms of the other groups in the country. And they also not comfortable with Iranian policy of politicizing Islam.
Thank you. Now it's time for the questions from our audience. Yes, sir.
That raises the obvious question as to the Gulen and its relationship to the U.S. You did talk a little bit about its interest in Korea. What would the public, what's the public opinion as far as how the U.S. should be conducting itself militarily right now in that area? Is that something that has come up that, say, in the public publications as to what their interests are as far as the U.S. and how we should conduct ourselves, not only with respect to Israel, but with respect to the Korean
the media coverage, how it is covered? Well, I think about the capitalism, there is no systematic critique of capitalism, unfortunately, in the movement. And the movement very much sees market or capitalism something good that some way this competitiveness of the capitalism is part of the, maybe not the philosophy of the Gulen, but the actions of the movement, that you need to be competitive, you need to engage, you need to do the best. And we also there is a sense that the movement feels that they should be powerful as well. So movement doesn't shy away from wealth or power. But they want that wealth and power to be used for the ultimate goal or the purpose of what the movement believes in. And most of the supporters of the movement in Turkey are middle or higher middle class, upper middle class. So the type of Islam is evolved, or the interpretation of Islam very much, I would say, caters this developing Turkish economy. That this is, they are not critical so they're very comfortable with the capitalism and the economic wealth and power. But again, there should be some ethical boundaries what you can do with the power and wealth.
I guess I was asking, are they comfortable with Americans right now in terms of travel? And because we know that there's certain places that Americans aren't really welcome right now. So my question is this a good place right now?
In Turkey?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's any problem in Turkey. I think in Americans, they can, I don't see any problem. I think Turkey is still one of the main destinations for American tourists. And the movement is leader of the movement is in the United States. One of the accusation movement receives from some radical Islamic groups, they frame the movement as Uncle Sam's Islam, or it is an American Islam, and they think that the Gulen movement is nothing but the CIA, set of CIA activities. This is very much, you hear these kind of charges from the leftists, the communists, and also some people in Russia, for instance. Movement is not active because they treat movement as nothing but the American extension. So the movement is, again, also sharply criticized inside Turkey as well by anti-American groups, because one of the charges that the leader of the movement is in the United States. The type of Islam movement tries to develop is nothing but the American design type of Islam.
Yeah.
Mike, I'm okay. I think we have a good voice. You can do it without mic. Thank you. İlhan Tanır from Turkish Daily Vatan. Quick couple questions. The first one is how do you predict going forward? Next year is going to be very important in terms of the new constitution discussions, Kurdish issue, and the presidential elections. Given that you talk about the problems, recent problems between the AKP government and the Gulen movement, what is your prediction going forward next year? And my second question is on Syria. You talk about Syria and how the movement sees that, but at the same time we also know that the Gulen Hoca Efendi himself in 1991, for example, during the first Gulf War, he was actually outspoken against the, Scud missiles going from Baghdad to other countries. And also he talks about the human rights issues in other countries. So in Syria, we see human rights issues and humanitarian problems. I'm still I don't exactly understand what is that
in the early period. But the movement, I would say, evolved under Turgut Özal's liberal economic and political policies. In other words, the origins of the movement are in Islam, but the body and branches are not. I hope it started as a religious movement, but today certainly those roots inform some of the actions and activities of the movement. But I would not consider the movement as a religious movement anymore. What we have here is very much a transnational civil society movement rooted in a certain understanding of Islam. So in the United States, some of the good schools, Princeton, Harvard, all built by the religious sects, but evolved. They eventually evolved and they become something else. Similar here, I would say, that this is a movement in making. However, where it started and where it is today is an incredible story. So we should not consider this as a religious movement. We should see it as a civil society movement. So as a civil society movement, it has certain concerns and certain visions on the Kurdish issue. And the movement was very critical of confrontation between military and Kurds, but always supported the fight against the terrorism, the PKK. And so the movement wants a compromise, but a compromise, a reconciliation, but not a type of reconciliation that will break the country into two parts. A reconciliation that would allow individual rights and freedoms rather than communal or ethnic rights and freedoms. I think so. The movement makes, what I see in their writings, these distinctions, that they are more concerned individual rights, not they don't want to promote any ethnic group. But the movement overall is critical of both Turkish and Kurdish nationalism at the same time. But they are very skeptical of current opening of the Prime Minister's policy. They are not against, but they are very skeptical. They want their policies wait and see. what is happening, but they are not obstacle. They promote the peace, but in the country, because no one knows what is the compromise, what the Turkish government is going to give to Kurds in order to let the Kurdish groups to give up their guns. So this is the main issue, and I think so. The movement is very cautious. What I read, again, I'm not a member of the movement, but I follow the movement as much on the media as you do. And about the Syria, the movement is again wanted to see a dialogue, some peaceful transition, rather than this is whereas Justice and Development Party, AK Party, they wanted to, confrontation. They are arming, I would say, also some of the groups inside there, Qatar, what I read in the media, the Qatar, Saudi Arabia and Turkey, these are the three countries. I don't think movement would feel comfortable with that. They would prefer a more peaceful transition. They are not pro-Assad, but they see the violence would tear country apart. Most of the articles, what I see, they are not promoting jingoistic type of, trying to go after Assad. Again, there is tension on the foreign policy issue that they want engagement but not confrontation. What was your other question?
Did you talk to Gulen before you wrote your book?
My book, again, I did met with him several times, but before the book, not after the book. Many years ago. But when I was writing this book, I never, informed that I'm writing this book, what should I write, or because I do engage with the members of the movement, and I do engage with Hoca Efendi sometimes through the letters, but I did not discuss the book before I put together.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much. My name is Pim Valkenberg. I teach theology at the Catholic University of America. I have two questions that are somewhat related. The first question that just came up a few minutes ago is about this new form of Islam that you were describing. And one of the things that you were saying was, well, it evolves more and more into an individualistic, I don't think you mentioned the name, but it would fit very well with this Protestant ethical approach. And also it's this new form of Islam that's very much ethically oriented. And I can see that in my own studies of the Hizmet movement, with most of the members, that it evolves so much that you can ask yourself, in what sense are people who are on a personal level often very practicing Muslims, they are not really bringing that being Muslim into how they act as Muslims. So my question would be, on the one hand, does that mean that it could evolve into a kind of a movement that has no longer any affinity with Islam, that for instance Jews, Christians, Buddhists could become members as well? The second question that is related to that is, I think there is still a tension. If I know, from what I know from Haj Effendi, Fethullah Gulen's books, he is still very much engaged in study of Quran, Hadith, and all the traditional Islamic disciplines. So I think there is a kind of a widening movement, while at the same time the persons who are still involved in the core activities of the movement are very much focused on their more or less Sufi oriented form of Islam. That leads me to my second question. Could that explain why there is so much enmity towards the movement? I'm a Dutch person myself. 2 weeks ago there was a huge uproar in the Dutch media. The two things that you hear every time is Gulen and his movement have a double agenda. They function, they seem to be integrating into European society. That's what they say that they do, but in fact they are not. And what they show then is people saying, well, we were in these boarding houses that they have, we were to see films with wars between Muslims and Christians, and they say, well, in the end we will win. That is one thing that I heard on Dutch public television 2 weeks ago. And the second thing that is related to that is connected with what you said about the lack of transparency, because very often people who are representing parts of the movement are not openly saying, well, I am inspired by Fethullah Gulen. So there might be a kind of a problem there. Could you address that? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. These are all excellent questions. I think that what really the movement helped in Turkey, it became a model for other Muslim groups in the country, in Turkey. I cannot say this for outside, but especially in Turkey, they set the standard, the trend. So what we have here, a new form of Islam that is ethical Islam. Islam is about insan-ı kamil, or it is becoming a perfect human being through controlling your lower desires and becoming a concerned person, that you concern your community, your environment, and whatever you see, the creation of the God. So there is this powerful ethical aspect of the movement. What we are seeing here as something, I would say, very original, something very important, but most of the members of the movement they are so busy with their own activities, they don't really sometimes realize that is this. In Turkey, we didn't have, let's say, Protestant Reformation, no Kant, no Hegel, so intellectual basis of secular ethic in Turkey, I would say, still very weak. So what we are seeing here, that Mr. Gulen, he teases out a new ethical language and ethical discourse derived from Islam, but they are not necessarily religious. That here some intellectual activity is going on, that new language is created, new language is constructed by him to engage, let's say, in conferences in Europe or in the United States. In other words, that a type of language that you can build bridges, type of language, I would say, a rationalized, secularized language, but it is very much teased out or created or crafted from Islamic philosophy and Islamic theology. I think this is something very important. And this is and then he calls people civil. I said his vision of Islam is civil philosophy, that the consensus, what is right and what is wrong, or shared notion of the good life, what is good life, it has to be debated and discussed. You cannot let one ulama or alim or a mullah or a cardinal or a bishop to dictate you this is right, this is wrong. There has to be a debate, including the meaning of the verses. This communication is something very important. What I see, what is happening larger in what Gulen's work, and especially in his poetry, there is a distinction between hotel and home. The Gulen's attempt to, he believes that the Muslims are so long living in the hotel, now they have to build their own home. By home means that living within your own cultural, spiritual milieu, rather than living on the basis of someone else's rules and regulations. I think this is something very important. About there is a major gap, I would say, sometimes even tension between Hoca Efendi, his vision and his philosophy, and some of the activities of movements in different parts of the world. And he is more or less rooted in one feet in the theology, other he tries to develop a new discourse. But the members of the movements are not intellectually, they don't have much curiosity. This is, I also brought in my book that they are not curious. There's very little curiosity what is happening. About the double standard, I am again, I would consider myself as a social democrat in the Turkish political landscape. And I'm not a full-time believer either. I consider myself as a part-time believer, sometimes as a Jack Muslim. In Utah, you have Jack Mormon. Jack Mormons are those who drink Jack Daniels. They are called Jack Mormon. So I consider myself not a full-time pious person, but certainly culturally I am rooted in that Islamic cultural ethos. But I wouldn't, this double standard or is usually, I see it coming out from an Islamophobic groups here in the United States and the Orientalist groups in the Europe, that they always think that there is something behind. There has to be something secret. I think it is very much, it had to do with this, Islamophobic and Orientalist debate. But it is also, especially if you look at the Middle East Forum lately, you see a number of articles along the same line that Muslims are conquering or this or that, a very negative tone. I think transparency, you are right, that it is a major issue that sometimes because of the political oppression or political situation in Turkey, the members of the movement, even they are in the United States or in Europe, they don't want to say they are member of the movement. Sometimes if their name is Hassan, they take a temporary name Hans. Hassan becomes Hans, or Farooq becomes Frank. And so you have these, but again, there is a fear still that if we are open, how could we survive in this Islamophobic environment? I think some of these are also reaction to those, but I think they need to do some work there to be more open, more transparent on the decision-making process, on telling people who they are. Yes.
The topic is exciting and interesting, and I think we would love to talk even more, but I'm afraid we don't have much time left. Thank you so much for your great insights, and thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.